Welcome to Transcendence Talks podcast with your host, licensed professional counselor Kristy Crabtree. Join us as we build the bridge between psychology and spirituality and discuss psychology for the soul.
Hey everybody, welcome to Transcendence Talks podcast. I'm here with Dave, and Dave and I met back in 2020. It was like pandemic time.
What?
And this feels so full circle for me because I signed up for a training in 2020 to learn internal family systems therapy after years of trying to figure out who I am as a clinician. And I knew that this would be like the thing, and it was. But Dave was actually one of my trainers. He was a PA, or project assistant at the Institute, and I trained with him after, and then here we are. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to see you. It does kind of feel like full circle from when we first met. I think we ran our first IFS workshop for people that were just interested in the model right before the pandemic happened, and then we went from in-person, then onto online, and then back in person as much as we could. And those are fun times as far as that group was concerned. Pandemic wasn't super fun, but being in a group of people that were just interested in internal family systems and watching pretty much everyone in that group go from, having very little knowledge of IFS then into level one, where I was a program assistant for most of you, and then even being a PA for level two, and just like watching you all absorb the model and just run with it has been a pleasure to watch.
Well, thank you. Do you remember? Oh my gosh. Yeah, that training, it was supposed to be in person in Scottsdale. And then I was like, oh, no worries, right? Like the training's in June. It was March. And they were like, 2 weeks, right? And everything will be fine.
Yeah, it'll be fine by the summer.
Yeah, a little did we know. But anyways, but yeah, it's been 5 years since then, and so much has changed. And I still to this day admire so much the work that you do, especially in the couples arena with IFS, the way that you so masterfully juggle dynamic between couples, because there's so many moving pieces. And I know we've worked with a lot of shared clients. I refer, a lot of my singles that I work with to you so that you could see them as a couple. And so I get that feedback, and I get to hear about how it went and watch these transformations happen and how it impacts the partner that I'm working with, which has just been such a pleasure. So
yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate the shout out. And as a marriage and family therapist, I'm an MFT, and we've probably accurately been accused as being like elitist in our different licensure, because there's like licensed clinical professional, social work, and us marriage and family therapists from the beginning. And I went to a program that really was exceptional as far as clinical training went. And so from day one, when we start seeing clients, like we'll see like an individual, and we'll watch tape. Like, why is there one person in the room? Like, don't they have a spouse? Don't they have like kids or parents? Is there a grandma we can bring in? They're like, get more people in the room, get more people in the room. They really push you to see things systemically. They get you to see that like an individual is not just an individual. An individual exists in the context of the relationships that they have. And there was a really heavy focus in my program. One of the professors actually did some work with Sue Johnson and was heavy in the attachment world. And once I started learning about attachment, I'd say I became like an attachment nerd and just soaked it up and really loved seeing what happens to people in their relationship. What makes them go right? What makes them go wrong? How do we correct it when it goes awry? And, I often get individuals, as I'm sure you do too, and they often talk about the struggles that they have. And I love having the ability of just the context to be able to say, okay, I hear what you're saying. I'd love to hear what your partner's saying.
Yeah.
And start with that Rubik's Cube. So yeah, I guess from early on, through training, through force, through being strong-armed, I really enjoy there being multiple perspectives in the room and balancing those out. And I think shortly after I graduated, when I first got introduced to internal family systems, that's why it felt so easy. People often forget that IFS, short for internal family systems, and internal family systems is internal family systems. And so we look at, the external relationships, which I really love. And then here's this model that looks at the relationship you have with yourself. And so to me, it all fits together nicely.
So for people who don't know anything about psychotherapy, maybe they've never heard of internal family systems before. I know for me, at least, it's probably been the modality that made the most sense to me. I mean, immediately for me, I think my first training was actually in 2019. It was just a smaller training in Scottsdale.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately I was like, oh, this is where I need to go. It was like I wanted to taste it before I went to that level 1 and made that big investment financially to learn it. But for those who don't understand multiplicity of mind, who don't understand what the nature of internal family systems, how would you describe it? And maybe that's a really big question, but
Yeah. And I think people might not understand multiplicity of the mind, but what they do understand is a part of me got really pissed off the other day, and they understand what it's like to get sort of taken over by a reaction. And sometimes that's thoughts, sometimes that's emotions, but being able to and people even talk, they say, a part of me got really mad at you the other day. And what that means is that's the multiplicity of the mind, where people often understand like, oh, multiplicity of the mind, that's kind of scary. It's that like, a dissociative identity, or what used to be called multiple personality disorder. And that is a far extreme experience where parts are walled off and they're unaware of themselves. But most people have an awareness walking around where they go, yeah, a part of me, like I just thought about like how much I like this person. And I also just thought about how much I dislike this person. And so those thoughts and those experiences can be understood and can be managed. And we can have a relationship with ourselves and with these, what we call parts of ourselves.
Absolutely. I know, like, I feel like I deal with that on a daily basis, right? Like there's a part of me that wants to come home from work and open up the refrigerator and eat ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually a very young part of me that feels stressed and overwhelmed by the day and that doesn't have the tools and skills to like ground or recenter after my nervous system is stressed from my day. And then there's another part of me that's like, you know what? As much as I know you'd love to eat ice cream after work, there's probably better ways. Maybe go outside, kick your shoes off, and put your feet in the pool, and honor your body. And so there's parts of me that feel torn like that all the time.
Yeah, and you're alluding to something that really was highlighted and added to the conversation by Richard Schwartz, who created the therapy model of internal family systems. Because people have known about this multiplicity of the mind for quite a long time and have talked about it. There have been other therapy models that have included parts and parts work. But what Dick Schwartz brought to the table was an organization of them. Just like the name I mentioned before, internal family systems. He brought a family systems model to this internal arrangement and said, it isn't just these random thoughts and experiences, but in a way they kind of cohabitate, and it makes sense that sometimes when I do have this part of me that wants to eat ice cream, and I do, next I can set my watch to the part of me that then beats me up about it. It tells me how terrible I am. Why'd you do that? You're so stupid. And then, maybe there's a part that comes in later that numbs me out. And so being able to track that, just as we track family systems, and going back to my original thought, is the thing that Dick Schwartz brought to it, including that, was this idea that there's a way to observe it. There's this phenomena that exists within us that he calls the self with a capital S. And that self with a capital S is this observing ego, this spiritual self. Different traditions, I called it different things. But it's the ability to have an awareness and not be taken over by what these parts feel in the moment. Like, for example, the idea of like, I lost my shit the other day. I got super angry. I got really mad. I started saying things and I started thinking things. And then when I calm down later on and I reflect on what I was thinking, what I was doing, I go to myself, the things I was thinking in the moment made a lot of sense. And I really believed them. Mm-hmm. And I don't believe them right now. I was looking through this tiny little window. But now I see with a much wider vision, and that wider vision, that capacity to see a wider vision, to have that compassion and that nuance, that is the self-energy. I tell my clients all the time, it's like the parts get elected to be mayor of Truth Town.
I love that.
And whatever the parts say, we just go along with sometimes, and we just believe. And it's like, well, the part said that I'm nothing, so I must be. But having that capacity, that's sort of like where the rubber meets the road in the work that I'm often doing with clients, is to be able to get that separation. In the IFS world, we call it unblending, to separate from those beliefs and those feelings and look at it and hold it and go, hold on a second. There's something more to this. And oftentimes the problem with parts for us, like normal functioning people in the world, is that the things they come up with aren't super crazy. They're not super disconnected from objective reality.
Right.
It's real enough, like you genuinely have made a choice to like not eat the ice cream and then you do, or not drink too much and then you do, or not like yell at your kids and then you do. Like these are things that objectively you're trying not to do. So when this shame comes in and just like, or this critical voice comes in and just starts putting you down, it's not saying things that are totally out of bounds. It's actually sometimes true, part of it. But the way that it comes in often doesn't solve the problem. But
Right.
that self and that objective capacity.
Right. So it's like when the parts are engaging with each other, they're kind of going round and round in these circles, and we get caught up in these thought spirals of shame, anxiety, overthinking, and things like that. But when we can unblend, when we can separate, we get that, like you said, that broad picture, that objectivity, and we can start to make some real impactful changes.
Correct. And where the attachment stuff I was talking about, the couples, that relationship stuff, and the IFS, where that really comes together is it's not just enough to be objective and look at it. That's certainly part of it. And I use that word a lot because my system and my parts tend to be more cognitive. But it's not just a objective understanding of, as CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy would say, it's not just, challenging cognitive distortions and saying, oh, that's not really true. It's creating a relationship with these parts. It's almost as if the analogy I like to use, like in Lord of the Flies, like where all those like boys are on an island together, just like figuring it out as best they can. And, hilarity ensues and violence ensues and all these things happen. It's like, imagine an adult parachuting down onto that island and taking a look around and being like, whoa, okay, glad people are alive. But let me get in here and start to teach and mentor and care and treat the kids that have just been scared and terrified and doing the best that they can. And some of those boys on the island would welcome that adult and just be like, oh, thank God, an adult's here. Thank goodness. And others maybe, wait, who the heck are you? Like, I've been in charge here. I have the conch shell or whatever was used in the book.
Yeah.
And like, I have the power. And so I get to decide what's happening. Like, you're threatening the way that I've been doing it. Go away. We don't need you. Mm-hmm. And it's that appropriate adult, that self energy that we have, that capacity to have, that allows to create that relationship with the parts that maybe, we like people talk about like, oh, it's your inner child. Mm-hmm. Our field has done a really great job of being sensitive and aware to that wounded part of us. But oftentimes there are parts of us that protect and show up in ways that maybe hurt ourselves or hurt others or are less likable.
Right.
And what IFS teaches is that we need to have, if we're going to have compassion for those wounded parts of us, we can't just get in there, bulldoze those other parts, shove them aside, criticize them, tell them they're bad, and then show up with this like warm heart for the parts of us that are hurt. Dick Schwartz often quotes a poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow that I love. It's like, if we could read the secret histories of our enemies, we would find in each person's life sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all hostilities.
Beautiful.
And that is part of the model, is like the part of you that wants to eat ice cream, the part of you that's critical, probably showed up at a very young age and figured out how to get out of pain like that. It figured out how to not be hurt in a way, and temporarily and very quickly. The problem is all these things worked temporarily and quickly, but long term they may actually be causing the thing that they're trying to prevent.
Absolutely. Well said. So maybe we want to kind of like name these parts so listeners can start to really conceptualize for themselves, okay, how do I make sense of my own internal world? So we've got self energy, who's this parent that I love this analogy of them kind of parachuting down into this, island and being like, okay, I'm here. And that has qualities, right? We know we're in self energy when there's 8 C's, right? When we're curious and when we're feeling creative or compassionate. and there's other C's. But yeah, how can one start to kind of like make sense of these internal realities?
Yeah, the way that the IFS model sort of divides that up in terms of like knowing where we are and helping somebody is there's that self energy that we're hoping to cultivate and to foster. And the way that we do that is we look for the parts and we help them kind of get in relationship. So as a therapist, I'm here to sort of help direct a person through that, to help create that relationship that they want with themselves. And when people come into therapy, the parts that are usually showing up are what we call managers, protectors. We'll just call them protectors for brevity.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there's kind of two categories. There are parts that protect and are doing something, behaviors or feelings or responding in a way that help to avoid an emotional overwhelm. And the part that carries that wound or that emotion is what we call the exile. Other schools of thought call it like you have a wounded child, the part of you that experienced maybe a trauma or an event or a relationship that's hurtful. And so it carries that hurt. And then there's, what's often called the adaptive child. Like, what did we do in those moments of pain brilliantly to get out of it? And something that I like to say is that, if you have kids, especially if you have multiples, you realize that kids kind of come out of the box a little bit different.
Yeah, they do.
So we're sort of born with like a bit of a temperament.
Mm-hmm.
And I say temperament becomes personality. Personality becomes strength. Strength becomes our superpower. And a lot of times our superpower is what brings us down. So if we have a temperament that's kind of wired and geared towards like high functionality, perfectionism or like doing things well and doing things right, if we get wounded early on and we feel pain from whatever it may be, maybe a highly critical parent or maybe abuse of some kind, or it may just be life. We figure out that, hey, this temperament style I have, this personality, like I get things done. And when I get things done and I do them well, I get praise. And that works and that feels good. And so all of a sudden kids learn how to lean in to those personality styles and those strengths. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, I'm the one that gets the good grades. I'm the one that does everything else. Not my little brother. He's a screw up. Like I do everything right. And so all of a sudden it becomes like relational. And in that, when it becomes relational, it just becomes this thing. And then it's like, oh, that's my personality. But a lot of times it's like, that's a part of you. And that part learned really early on that if I can function very highly in this perfectionistic way, I don't have to feel that feeling of inadequacy.
Right.
I don't have to feel what it feels like to not feel good enough.
Yeah.
And so there we have that part that holds that wound, and that adaptive part, that manager or protector, that kind of like rises above. And that's what we often see. And then clients come in, they sit down, they say, Kristy, I'm just so anxious all the time. I always feel like I have to do everything right. And I don't know what's going on. Like, how do I fix this?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And then they get these like other parts that hate that productive part, that start to have resentment, and they're bitter, and they feel like nobody around me does anything or contributes, right? Because this part does it all. So and so they start looking outside of themselves and blaming, but inside they have these parts that are kind of at odds with each other. And so, it does. It gets so relational.
Or another part finds the ice cream or the alcohol and they go, oh, what a freaking relief.
Mm-hmm. I don't have to work.
The only time this part ever calms down is when I can drink. It finally shuts it up.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the shame comes in, and then we don't know how to find a way out.
Yeah. And so therein lies that internal family system, the same family system that can exist in an external relationship of family. The internal system sort of mirrors that. And, so when we sit down with clients, we'll start to track that. Like, tell us what's going on. Tell us about your life. Tell us what brought you here. And they will tell the story of what their parts are, and they'll sort of jump from part to part or describe it. And so, then we help people sort of navigate that and separate from those emotions to be able to look at them and be aware of them and parachute down onto the island, so to say, and be with them and create a different relationship. And the other thing that I love about it, and I say this early on to clients that are just starting, it's like, hey, we're not getting rid of these parts. And I've seen people experience just unbelievable healing and powerful change But sometimes afterwards, a pattern may show up or something intense happens in their life and they kind of fall back into that motion. And then they can start to believe a part shows up that's like, see, I thought we did this and now we're not doing it right again. And this is back and all this was crap. I thought I dealt with this.
Yeah.
You know, how many clients have you talked to? Like, I thought I already dealt with this. It's like, well, these relationships might be around for a real long time. And what we can do is we can decrease the intensity, frequency, and duration of them.
Yeah.
But if you get into a relationship with it, it's almost like it doesn't have to go.
No.
If
They
it gets
find harmony,
inflamed,
they
it's
find
like,
balance.
yeah, just reconnect with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, and that is a conversation I feel like I have with clients over and over, which is I thought we did this. I thought we've gone through it. But it's so cool too, because I feel like before a client comes to therapy, these parts are largely unconscious. They don't have awareness of these patterns. They don't see the interplay between the protectors and the dance they do. And a lot of times, you know, the first 6 months of treatment, we're getting to know these parts, we're going through the process, and we're making these unconscious patterns conscious. And then this new awareness kicks in, and you start to notice after maybe 6 months or so of therapy that clients are like, oh my gosh, Kristy, I thought we had dealt with this, but then I noticed this pattern coming back. And what was so cool is this time I was able to pause and be like, okay, I see you. And I put my part in a chair across from me and we had a whole conversation, you know, and I was able to like take a step back and really just be with it versus be reactive. And it's really cool to watch clients make that kind of progress where they're really owning those patterns and having conscious awareness so that they can shift in vivo in the moment.
Yeah. And I think that is clients will often say, I feel like I'm getting so much more out of this than I have in the past experience. And a lot of that is because with IFS, there's like a plan and a purpose and an intention, and it's to get people in relationship with themselves in a better way, in a very focused and strategic way. And it creates lasting change, and it gives clients a feeling of self-empowerment through changing this relationship in a way that like we give them a roadmap and we practice it when we're in the office. And as they grow in that awareness, they start to be able to do the things that we're doing in the office on their own.
Yeah.
And it really gives them, you know, it's not considered, especially by IFS people, it's not considered to be a very tools-based model. And therapists know what that means. Like, it's not CBT. It's not like, come in here, we're going to give you like this homework and this is the thing you're going to do and this is the thing you're going to master. But yet it is. It does give this sense of, now I know what to do when this shows up. When this thing happens that used to take me out, I can see it with so much more clarity and I can intervene on this pattern and change it.
Absolutely. You know, it's funny because learning IFS made me see CBT in a totally different light.
Yeah.
Because CBT is so tools based and, you know, we're going to give you homework and we're going to challenge these thoughts. And I think CBT highlights multiplicity.
Yes.
Because clients will so often say when they've gone to a CBT therapist, something like, you know, I know that this belief that I'm unlovable isn't true. And I can say those affirmations and I can use that tool, but there's still something inside of me that feels like it's bullshit when I say these things to myself in the mirror. And
That's
it's like,
part.
yes, because that tool is affirming your manager's ability or your protector's ability to cope and use a skill, but it's not dealing with the part of you that's splintered and fractured from yourself, that younger part of you that's been exiled away. And I'm glad we spent time talking about the protectors, because I think it's important for listeners to realize that trauma fractures us from ourselves. And IFS is a key modality to reconnect to ourselves and bring us back home to who we are. And, you know, you talked about how the protectors have such a positive intention for us, which is to get us out of pain. And it works, but it comes at a cost. And that cost is we're repressing out of necessity because it's not safe to deal with that emotion at the time. We have to pack it somewhere in our body and deal with it later. And that creates the fracture. And it fractures us on an emotional level, and I think a spiritual soul level, and also a physical level, because it creates inflammation in the body. And I want to talk about too, I mean, so this is a somatic therapeutic modality. It's not cognitive. It lives on all levels, you know, physical, spiritual, and emotional. And what's so beautiful about it is when you ask a client, which we do when we work with every part, you know, where do you feel this in your body? They know they'll be like, oh, it's my stomach. They don't even think, oh, it's my heart, it's in my neck. And they immediately know where that trauma or where that protector is living. So
Yeah.
it literally frees up space on every level of existence.
Yeah. And something you said made me think of, bring me back to the Lord of the Flies analogy, which I keep seeming to bring up. But it's like the cognitive way, and I think it's therapy is like the traditional like analogy of the iceberg. The cognitive part of therapy has to be there. It's that piece of the iceberg that's like above the water. And it's really important. And all good therapy includes some form of CBT, some form of cognition and shift. But there's that whole part of that iceberg that's under the water. And that's what IFS, among others, can really access. And the reason I love it so much is because it's done in a relational way. And just to frame this with this analogy is like, imagine those kids on the island and you're the adult that parachuted down. The cognitive behavioral shift is to go, hey, do you see all these kids? And it's like, yeah, they're going freaking crazy. Like, what the hell is going on? Well, they've been like shipwrecked here for a really long time. And so they're little and they've had to figure it out. And you go, oh, now I understand why they're being the way that they're being. That doesn't change any of the situation on the island. But it's really helpful and really important to then, with that understanding, be able to go in. And then what makes it relational is the difference between the adult showing up and be like, everybody, the adult's here. Here's why you're doing this. Stop it.
Yeah.
It's like, good luck. I do that with my kids all the time. Hey, knock it off. Stop yelling.
Right. Yeah.
Stop having a temper tantrum. And guess how often that works? I guess if I get big and scary enough, it works and they get like scared and changing, but that doesn't help. It just causes more trauma. The real way to create the change is relational, where you go in, you get on their level and you go, oh, I totally understand why you're doing it this way. This makes so much sense. It's really scary. What's your biggest fear would happen if you stop doing this? Well, then everything would fall apart. That one over there would start beating that one up and everything would collapse. Totally get that. Thank you so much for doing this job. Hey, would you like some help with this? I can help you. We can do it differently. And it's like, well, I don't know if you can really do it. It's like, well, let me try.
Yeah.
And a lot of what we're doing in a person's internal system is we're simply saying, we're walking in with the belief that the self of this person is capable of handling whatever emotions those wounds hold. And a lot of times it's a different belief that you hear clients over and over again. I don't want to get close to that. It's too much. I will go over the falls and be in this world. And it's like, no, it will be intense. Yeah. And there's a way in which we can get in relationship with the parts where something as simple as saying, ask that part if they'll share it with you slower. And it's amazing how often something that simple works. And I'm like a born skeptic, or maybe I'm a skeptic through trauma, but I am a skeptic for whatever the origins of. And so a lot of times when I would see IFS, it was in the beginning, I would watch it and be like, it can't be like that. And then I'd watch it work and I'd be like, okay, it works. So I'm going to try it.
It absolutely does. I know it shocks me every time because it's so simple, but so profound.
Yeah.
It just seems too easy. Like it doesn't have to be complicated. And it gives people a sense of control of like, oh, wow, I really can slow down these feelings, or I can just take a step back from it and give myself a little more distance in my mind sight. And somehow that decreases the intensity of what I'm feeling and makes it easier for me to be with it.
It's to me, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, and it blows my mind every single time. And the feedback I get from clients is, wow, I've given up on therapy in the past because it just started to feel like too much. And this feels like I'm starting to believe that I can do this.
Yeah, because it really empowers people to be, what IFS calls the self. Another phrase I like is the appropriate adult. And to have that it's relational. And if, even if we move off the island for a minute here and just say, like, if you're doing a job and someone comes in the door, starts yelling at you to stop it, that's probably going to cause some defensiveness and some pushback. But if someone comes in the door and they're like, hey, I really see how hard you're working. Thank you so much for doing this. We've learned that there's another way. Would you like to try a different way? Because this way looks exhausting. And parts are often exhausted. Those protective parts are often exhausted by the work that they're doing.
Have you had an experiential experience with IFS with any of your parts where like you felt that just visceral shift in relief? Because as you're talking about it, it's like, gosh, I remember the first time that happened for me and it still almost makes me a little bit emotional. I don't know if there's any experiences you want to share with that, but I'd love to hear.
Yeah, it's kind of strange for me because IFS is done in this sort of, it's almost like narrative in a way, like where there's this storyline and you go inside and you talk with your parts. And some people like, they do it just so effortlessly.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, because of my ADHD brain, my parts don't really sit down with me and we don't communicate in this like very conversational, like you say this, I say that. It's like I get a burst of information kind of all at once. And then I can communicate back to my parts and really like it will show me like rapid fire a bunch of different things, not necessarily in words, but more in like feeling and imagery. And it's like my parts love to be understood. And I think that kind of applies to my sort of cognitive nature. So my parts can be understood. And that was like the first time I could receive that for myself, because I'm often, for so long, I was trying to get other people to understand me. And it comes across as like sharing information really fast, talking a lot, like especially in like work environments, where I'd be like, no, like you have to understand this. And I'd be constantly trying to like get people to get it. And it's exhausting. And I remember the time being able to like hear that for myself and recognize it and recognize that younger part of me that grew up with like all sorts of learning disabilities and struggled through school and like, went to community college in my first semester and got a 1.125 GPA, failed like algebra, like the most basic level courses I was taking because I was trying to learn how to learn. And I just felt stupid for so long. And so this part that was like desperately trying to get everyone to see that I wasn't dumb was just working overtime, and to be able to like sit with that part and be like, I get it. And then to heal what was behind it, that kid that like felt really stupid, that like was sitting in the classroom when he was really little, doing this little worksheet, like trying to figure out like why this thing was wrong when it made sense to me, like, yeah, being able to like, I realized I lived a lot of my life, as we all do, trying to overcome that moment.
Yeah.
And with my, my clients that often parlay that into high impact careers and very successful careers, it's like they're so afraid they're going to lose that edge. They're so afraid they're going to lose the one thing that they've been holding on to. And it's like, hey, you don't have to lose that. We can heal that, and you can use that as a skill, but with choice.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And you can use it when you need to and not use it when you don't, and not try to like fix relationships with this part, And so for me, being able to like relax into relationships more and relax into being who I am more was really powerful.
Wow. Relax into being who I am more. I mean, that's such a universal aspect of healing, I think, is authenticity, kind of balancing out, harmonizing these parts of us that have just been on overdrive and living more in authenticity, more fearless, more careless. So, I guess careless isn't the right word, but I mean, just more free, right? Like more freedom on the inside. And that's just such a beautiful way of phrasing it.
Yeah. And I think oftentimes, this kind of makes me think about something, maybe this is off topic, but like for those clients that I meet with, sometimes therapy has this way, like the therapy culture has this way of like, oh, this is the way that you should be. Like if they're really high performance and that's getting in their way, it's like the therapist like way of like judging success is like, okay, if you sell all your businesses, you grow out a ponytail, and then like you start selling like healing crystals in Sedona.
Right.
And they're terrified that like that's not that that's a bad choice, not they're not going to do that, but it's like there's still something that they love about like success and being driven. It's like you can have that, you can still have that part of your personality, but you can balance it out and not use those like that one tool in your tool belt. You've got one tool in your tool belt, and it's like created success in business, but it's destroyed your home life.
Right. Yes.
And so here's a way to maintain some of that personality that you love, but also incorporate the the healing that can bring you closer to the relationships that matter to you.
Absolutely. Allow you to be more present.
Yeah.
So I think this is a good segue into the exiles, because it's so neat to look at these protectors and realize that they're really young. It's like sometimes we're literally allowing, back to your island, the kids to make all the decisions and to run our lives. And when we start to realize that, okay, a 13-year-old who's really young is running our lives, it can be a little bit surprising. And then again, like you said, to see what's underneath that. And I think in pop psychology right now, there's like a big focus where they take aspects of IFS, taking it out of context and really just focusing on like healing the inner child wound or like parenting the inner child, but they negate the most important part, which is really working with this protective system.
Yeah.
And I mean, being an IFS therapist, I've seen it time and time again how important it is to really slow down and honor these protectors for keeping us safe, because we can only heal when the time's right. If we don't have a safe home environment, a safe physical environment, if we don't have emotional safety established in our relationships, these protectors aren't going to go anywhere because we still need to rely on them in some way. So healing seems to happen in layers and phases, and this part deserves us to really slow down and honor it. But then eventually what we come to realize is that they became out of balance. These parts are out of harmony because there's a younger, oftentimes wounded child underneath the protector that, like you mentioned, we're afraid to feel all of what that part might have to show us or tell us about its wound, because we might be overwhelmed, or this thing might fall apart, or the wheels will fall off here if we let ourselves experience all of that. So let's talk about exiles.
But when you talked about that, it made me think of something.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned like the sort of pop psychology way of doing all this. And you also mentioned something earlier, which I think ties into it. You said that the IFS model is incredibly simple and easy to understand and really applicable. And I would say the basic concepts are really simple. And as a result, and I think it deals with themes and processes that have been known for thousands of years, that people have been writing books and novels and stories about since the beginning of story writing. I think we as human beings we're like a narrative people. We love to tell stories and connect what happens as humans in our world into story. So I think this idea of like having parts is not new, and healing and parts holding wounds is not new, and that's been around for so long. And so when the right idea comes along at the right time, I think someone could go online and search up an IFS meditation and feel an incredible amount of healing from it. I think that someone could sit down with a friend and like have them walk through this process quite simply. It's not a complex thing when it goes right.
Yes, it's so nuanced though.
Yeah. And I think that, when it isn't so simple and a person's system is what we call like well defended, that's when you need a higher level of skill and training. And that's where the therapy skill and the training that you and I have both been through and have spent a lot of time and years dedicated to understanding, like, not what do I do when every step goes very right? Because it's quite simple. It's what happens when it doesn't follow the easy sort of like flow of understanding protectors. You kind of get to know them. You ask them to kind of give you some space, and then you get to the exiles and the parts that hold the wounds. And if that flows really simply, great. But there's a lot of people who have had a fair amount of trauma, or they have parts that they're really unaware of. And when that comes to the surface, it's really important to know what you're doing and to be able to follow the nuance of that system in a way that isn't hurting it, or it's doing more healing than hurting. And because the model, we respect the protectors, and we do not go to those wounds and those hurts until the system lets us know that it's okay to do so, that it's okay to start mucking around in a person's vulnerable, traumatic past.
Which is, honestly, I think that's what I respect about the model the most is consent. It's we are empowering the client with consent. And I'll be honest, when I was a young therapist, I think it was 2012, I got trained in EMDR. I was like a brand new LPC. and I was just
Yep.
going into private practice. So I'm like, well, I should learn EMDR before I go into private practice. I had a veteran in my office, and I'm just like sitting here with EMDR, like, go with that, go with that. But I didn't know IFS at the time, nor did I know any other parts based or ego state based models.
Yep.
And he, boom, went straight to the war trauma, straight to the trauma that happened when he was deployed. I will never forget the regression that this man went into and how severe it was. And he did end up hospitalized. And, you know, I remember thinking, I'm putting a kibosh on EMDR for a minute. That didn't go well. And looking back now, as a more seasoned counselor and with more training, I'm like, I didn't have an ego state model. It was too much too soon. And I did not get permission from, he gave consent for therapy. He gave consent for treatment, but he had parts of him that were not ready to go there. And I didn't know how to get access, nor did I realize that it was something I could do, was work with the parts that held that trauma and get permission from them before I opened that up. And nor I didn't know I could do it safely or slowly. I thought, okay, the goal is to get there. And that's what EMDR does. Yeah,
And
it's
you
a
did.
sledgehammer, and it did. But he wasn't ready and his system wasn't primed. And I want to talk about the exile, but like, what that led me to realize after doing, you know, this work over this amount of time and working with psychedelics now is, I call it front loading a client before they go into a psychedelic experience using IFS is the best way to avoid an overwhelming psychedelic experience, is by accessing all the protectors from a client, getting consent before they go into a state where they're in expanded states or non-ordinary states of consciousness. So I want to go there too.
Yes, they're combined, those two topics.
Oh, absolutely. The exile and these expanded states. So let's start with, what is an exile?
Yeah, an exile is, in IFS terms, the parts of us that carry a vulnerable wound or hurt or pain. It's just pain, internal pain. And whenever we experience things, you know, we experience hurt and pain. And the central nervous system doesn't really do a very good job at distinguishing between physical pain and emotional pain. It's all kind of coded the same. It doesn't care because it hurts. Emotional pain hurts, physical pain hurts. And our central nervous system has a really high functioning way of remembering that hurt and pain. It remembers it, it tags it, it stamps it, and it's very quick and fast, and it just takes in all the stuff in the environment around it to sort of predict it. And so we have this way of experiencing that pain and then protecting ourselves from it. So when we understand what the exile is, it's the part of us that holds that wound. And the reason it's called an exile in the IFS world is because we often take that part of us that's vulnerable and hurt, that causes that pain over and over again, and we find ways to push it away. Protectors exile the exile. They push it into the corner and they say, we're not going to feel that anymore. No, thank you. We've moved on. And, you know, like, thank you for sharing that experience, because I think we've all been there as unseasoned therapists where we weren't aware of the stop signs, where we have this, like, we're fresh out of school, we want to help people, we want to heal them, we know what emotions are, we can discern the difference between vulnerability and not. And when we find that vulnerability and we get to it, we're like, hallelujah, this is it. We found the promised land. This is how we're going to help this person heal, by like feeling this vulnerability. And sometimes if we do that too fast, it can be too much, like we've all experienced. And especially if you get somebody like a military veteran who's really good at doing hard things, that if they're convinced and you're convinced that, like, we have to get to this vulnerability, and they want healing because their life is not great with the post-traumatic stress that they're going through and all that they're experiencing. So they're like, tell me what hill to climb, I'll climb it. If I have to get to that vulnerability, I'll get there. And they'll even rush themselves through the stop signs. It's usually veterans and first responders that once they've bought into, like, all right, I have to get to my vulnerability, head down, how fast do I get there? And it's like, I'm pulling back on those reins, like, hold on, let's do this slowly. Let's get to that wounded part where we have that sense of self, where you can arrive there on the island with those kids, the ones that have been hurt or wounded, and that we can go there and be with them in a way that they need to. It's not just first one to the island wins. First one to the wound gets gets the prize. It's the way we get there is really important. And to your point about the psychedelics, that was my main concern. We talked about this at length when you were on my podcast a while back, where my main concern about the psychedelic assisted psychotherapy was, here's this model that really promotes this permission and consent, and we're kind of doing an end round, we're going around the wall in ways where it's like, hold on, like, on the one hand, it's like so obvious that this really it really helps for a certain population where other things can't. But man, I really want to make sure that when this becomes popular, if this becomes popular, we have now passed the Rubicon on that. Like, we are in the popular stage of this process, that people like you are going to dominate the space where it becomes ubiquitous and just standard operating procedure for people to go, hold on, are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Is your system ready? Are your protectors at least on board with where we're going to go? And for someone like you who has the skills of navigating when it's gone too far, you didn't have that back in the day. Neither did I when I was fresh out of school and you watched that guy kind of fall apart. But now you do. And that's sort of the standard of care that I would hope to find in the psychedelic therapeutic world.
Absolutely. And what scares me the most and what drives my passion is watching my clients come out of the psychiatrist office, and the psychiatrist is like, they've met them for 15 minutes. They've had a hand on the doorknob, because they bill in these 15-minute increments. They're like, oh, you should come do a ketamine session. They're like, oh, great, I'll trust your advice because you're the guy in the white coat. And I mean, they don't know them. There's no psychotherapy, and they just put them in a room alone. And they're like, cool, like, good luck on your journey. I'll check in on you in an hour. Maybe I'll take your blood pressure once or twice, and that's about it. I've really seen clients fall apart because they've had overwhelming experiences that maybe their psyche, those compartments kind of came down and everything was availed to them all at once, and it's too much too soon. And I don't feel like I've had those experiences with clients in the ketamine space. But there's also never been an experience I've had where I haven't worked in their protective system for at least 90 days in preparation to do those ketamine sessions, where we're really assessing and examining their ego state, and we're collaborating as a team, the client and I, to assess for readiness with their parts, and to even do some work with their exiles prior to going into that space, because I want trust to be facilitated between the exiles and between self energy. So it's not just this stranger parachuting in like, hey, I'm here to help, and everybody's freaking out. Like, they've been acquainted. Not that that doesn't mean that somebody won't have a difficult psychedelic experience. They can be, but the cleanup is a lot easier and faster when we've been acquainted with those parts and we've engaged in that system, beforehand.
Yeah. And it's also not to say that everybody needs that in order to have a positive experience. I don't think that that's the case. I know lots of people that have had a psychedelic experience even outside of a therapeutic setting, and it was really transformational for them and really changed their life and helped them heal, or at least shift into a new perspective in life that was incredibly helpful to them.
Absolutely.
But as professionals and as people who understand the human psyche, understand the human protective system, psychological protective system, I love that you are sort of waving the flag of the importance of, here's what's awesome about this. Here's like the potential. Here's the healing that is available. And buyer beware, be an informed consumer. Here's what can really help this become a better experience for you.
Absolutely. And I mean, like you said, some people, they do their work. Some people are really self-aware.
Yeah.
They've really spent a lot of time examining their parts in or out of therapy.
Yeah.
Therapy is not the only way to really be reflective and
Amen.
self-aware. And so people who are curious, reflective, self-aware, they already seem to have some access intrinsically to self-energy, or they haven't had so much trauma that they can't access it. They do tend to do pretty well with psychedelic experiences without guidance, But I think the more trauma we have, the more we find ourselves in like maybe defensive, ego states, blaming, self-judgment or criticism. If we don't have a lot of access to self-energy, or we're less self-aware, that can be a recipe for disaster, walking into a psychedelic experience without doing some work ahead of time.
Yeah. And I think some people see it the other way, where it's like, here's this person, they're so wound tight, they're really anxious, they're really controlling. You're the exact type of person that just needs a hero's dose of psilocybin and you will be fixed. And it's like, Maybe,
Maybe.
maybe that is an outcome that I have seen, and that is a possibility. On the other hand, they could come out and, when you take somebody's snow globe and you shake it up, and you take their defenses down, the negative outcome can be that the wall gets built bigger, and
Because that could be
that's a
traumatic in and
possibility.
of itself. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, I love, we kind of connected before the show and we were talking about what's been new in your world. And something that I just adore that you're planning on in the future is putting together integration groups. Because, again, I think it's a pitfall, and there's so many psychiatrists offering this, like ketamine, right, for example, that aren't doing any kind of psychotherapeutic work with these clients, any integration. Kind of like you and I spoke about earlier, psychedelics, they come with homework. The medicine is wise, and the medicine expands your consciousness into states of awareness that you can't normally access. And it usually demands that you do some work outside of the medicine, and people get caught up in wanting to chase these peak experiences. And so something it sounds like that you're interested in doing is really helping slow it down and allow them to honor the medicine fully by heeding the advice that it gave the client. And I think that's really important work. And I think IFS works so beautifully with that.
Yeah, I just want to help people create lasting growth. And sometimes the intensity of the experience and sometimes the metaphorical nature of it can be hard to integrate back into life. And yeah, my thought was I have so many clients that are experiencing are seeking out psychedelic experiences, both in a therapeutic setting and even more sort of recreationally or more traditionally through shaman work and things like that, that I think that there is often a need for people to take what they're doing and put it into an integrative way to incorporate that into their everyday life. And I feel like internal family systems is a really good way to help people sort of take that experience and apply it into their everyday life. It's practical and it's also metaphorical in nature. These parts, oftentimes people come back from their experiences, maybe because a lot of them, it's like a biased sample size of people working with me doing internal work with their parts. But even people that have never done IFS often experience coming back with having connected with parts of them. Yeah. And so I love running groups, and it's a skill set of mine to run experiential groups, not just sitting in a circle and talking, but creating visual ways of recreating what they experienced and being able to see it in a non-altered state. And that way they can bring their experience in their altered state back and kind of shift back and forth and notice and maybe find some language around it. Sometimes that can be helpful to them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And clarity too, because sometimes these experiences can be confusing, especially when we talk about memories coming up that may have been repressed, or is this metaphor, or is this reality? And what are the implications in my life? What do I do with that information? So sometimes there's just a lack of clarity afterwards that can leave participants more confused. And, at least in the retreat space, what I've witnessed is there just isn't any integration. Maybe a phone call or a Zoom call with the participants after the retreat. But I mean, that's pretty much the extent of it. And there's usually nobody really trained to deal with the integration. And it's kind of like, well, that was cool. Good luck with that. Have a nice life. Namaste. So.
Yeah, in some ways it's a bit like, I do a lot of work with personal growth retreats, experiential group workshops. I work for a program called Onsite out in Tennessee, where people come out for 5-6 days to have these really intensive healing experiences. There's no psychedelics introduced. It's very similar, where people bond and get close to the people they're in group with. They share a lot. They feel supported. They support other people. And then, it's 5 days of intensive work. And the same it goes with a psychedelic experience. It's intense work, especially when it's very healing and productive and people feel very different. They come out of it, and that's beautiful. But sometimes it's like, how do I take what this experience was and put it into my real life? In some ways, it's a lot like if you go on vacation with someone that like you're dating, and that vacation is super fun and exciting, and it becomes this like anchor point of your relationship, and it's beautiful and wonderful. Eventually you got to come home from the vacation and go back to work and figure out what to do with each other. And then you start arguing a little bit and you wonder, like, what happened to that experience on the relationship? Like on the vacation, was it not real? Are we not really meant to be? And sometimes people have these really powerful psychedelic experiences and then they come back to real life, but then they're not sure how to hold on to it. And as they get back to like the drumbeat of life and the music of life where it was kind of taken away, they start to distance themselves from the experience that they had. And I think integration can help maintain the experience that they had, like, and really ground it and say, okay, I can't be in that state all the time, fortunately and unfortunately,
Right.
But I can't be on vacation all the time, but here's how I can, integrate some of, like, what were the things that we actually did on that day? How did we talk to each other differently? How did I talk to myself differently when I was in that state? How did I feel about myself differently when I was in that state? How can I incorporate more of that now?
Absolutely. And sometimes really difficult and inconvenient truths come up about ourselves in the psychedelic space of maybe I'm too harsh with this person, or maybe I need to be kinder to myself here.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm whatever. So in the psychedelic state, we can be really open and receptive to receiving that information. And if we don't seek integration, it can be really easy to be like, and I'm going to put that back in a box because that felt really uncomfortable now that I'm back in my body. And so having the accountability even of somebody to be like, okay, I need to like really examine these things and figure out how to embody this change is critical.
Yeah. And to go back to what we were talking about before, it's kind of the inverse where sometimes it's like, all you get is the skills and the cognitive behavioral stuff. This is like the other end of the iceberg. It's like literally the base of the iceberg is like you're getting like the pure, unadulterated, subconscious, unconscious world that is brought to you in these like beautiful ways. And it may show you exactly what's going on in that relationship, but oftentimes it doesn't teach you the skills of how to actually change that.
So true.
So bringing in some of that, even just language for it, and maybe even a little like perspective of the IFS can help anchor that and make it so you can turn that insight into action.
Absolutely. I think for me, IFS has been the most helpful lens for both kind of, I call it front loading. I don't know what people call that, prepping.
I love that term.
Yeah, I just like to front load them and or prepare them, for a journey. But it's also the best tool for integration in my experience. I mean, because they have a relationship with their parts, they're already speaking that part's language, and so then we have this language in which we can communicate that experience that makes sense to both of us, where they're seeing the multiplicity, they're seeing these aspects of themselves play out in real life. They're getting to the origins of how these parts were formed. And they're just like, oh my gosh, I see why this part of me does this thing, because the experience is unfolding right before my eyes. And now we're able to, I think, develop an even deeper, more experiential sense of compassion. What I've seen is it almost strengthens that bond when we do a psychedelic journey between self-energy and that part, because we get, gosh, when you're in that psychedelic state, you're wrapped in self. It's as if you get to see you and your parts the way that God sees you, and you've put on a divine lens, and now you get to see your parts through the lens of divinity, and that's embodied because you felt it in your beingness, and nobody can take that away. And it is easy to compartmentalize that experience and put it on a shelf, but when you can anchor, like you said, that experience of embodying just pure love for yourself for maybe the first time for some people, or at least to that intensity, when you can anchor that in, it's critically important. And I think I've seen it shift people in ways that are so radical, so quick, and so profound.
Yeah. And there are, it's sort of like the bell curve of things. There are people in a quadrant where they've had like really negative experiences with psychedelics. And I think the more upfront work, the more front loading, the less likely that is to happen. But that's like one extreme. The other is like they've done one psychedelic experience and all of a sudden all that ails them is sort of melted away. And they don't really need integration because it's just, for whatever reason, it was the missing thing, the right thing at the right time. It just hit that bullseye. Yep. In my experience, it's kind of like the vast middle have a very positive experience or something that may have been shown to them that was like maybe not pleasant, but truthful. And it's in that middle where they're like, okay, what do I do with this? It's still therapeutic. It's like, how do I then incorporate this? And so that's kind of the population I'm aiming for, is to take those people that I've seen in time because they're not sure what to do with it and like how to integrate it, that really useful gold nugget that was just given to them gets like further and further out of their hands because they're not sure what to do next.
Absolutely. Well, you know what? I found my book's going to be launching May 10th next month. And it's interesting. I found this kind of common thread between my clients, myself, and psychedelic experiences. And the thread is that the healing happens in layers, and all these layers
Yeah.
aren't going to shed in one experience. But I mean, the first step to healing, whether you're using psychedelics or not, is just know yourself. You've got to be able to make the unconscious and bring it to the light of consciousness. Well, so you've done that. The next step is essentially death, right? Like it's surrendering into that and being like dying to the self, dying to the ego, or really, in parts work, it would be unblending, and creating some separation from that.
Yep.
And psychedelics do it in more of an intense way where it feels like a death because the shedding is so quick. But even in IFS, without psychedelics, the next phase is rebirth. Like, okay, this manager just agreed that it will let go of this role and it'll take on this new, more adaptive one for me. But then clients come in and like, I don't know if my manager really knows how to do that. Like, I'm rebirthing myself into something new. And even though I'm an adult, it feels uncomfortable. I feel kind of new again, and I feel uncertain in my role. And I went, from being really experienced in doing this one thing, and now I feel
Yep.
inexperienced in doing this new thing. So we're rebirthing ourselves. And the last step is to know who you are as create, to know that you're a fractal of God, that you are divinity, and that you're made in the image and likeness of the divine, and to know your potential as a human and to live in alignment with your being. And so I think depending on where somebody is in that psychic evolution or that healing process will greatly impact what they're going to have, the experience that they have in the psychedelic experience, or even with IFS, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I noticed that journey kind of tends to almost unfold for people organically, just in the healing process in general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm super excited for your book and
Thank you.
really excited for you and happy for all the growth that you dove headfirst into. And I feel like I've had a bit of like a, front row seat to this working with you when we first started in those IFS workshops and training groups. And so just excited to see and happy to, share in that excitement with you. It's really cool to watch.
Thanks so much. Dude, this was such an awesome conversation. I'm so excited because I allude to IFS all the time, and I don't think I've even ever done a formal podcast on really explaining the model. And seriously, who better than you to have this conversation with? And where can listeners find you if they would like to, attend a retreat, if they're struggling maybe with an experience they had and they need some help with integration?
Yeah. You can find me at my website, therapywithdave.com. I'm also on Instagram at Therapy with Dave. It's mostly just content from my fledgling podcast and just conversations with people that I think are interesting. And yeah, between those two things, by the time this comes out, I should have a page up on my website for my post-psychedelic experiential groups.
Beautiful. Awesome. Thank you so much. It was
Thank
so good
you.
to see you.
Likewise.
And, all right. Well, everybody, if you know anybody who could benefit from this podcast, from hearing about IFS, because I feel like this is a missing link for so many people in gnosis and really understanding themselves, please share this podcast with somebody who could benefit, or somebody who's had a difficult psychedelic experience that can really use some integration support. So thanks again, everybody. We'll see you soon.